Week 7, Bit 100. Welcome to Week 7, Bit 100. So this week we're going to be talking about Chapter 11 of the IBC, which is disability. So you've got a chapter that really focuses on the access to buildings for folks with disabilities or limited motion, that sort of thing. This chapter focuses on accessible routes. There's language in there related to parking, and it's all focused on new construction. The thing to remember about Chapter 11 in the building code is that it's focused on new construction. So it's not going to give guidance or direction on the remodels of buildings or bringing things to ADA compliance, if you will. It's going to focus on what things need to be built to when they're first constructed. So a plans examiner is going to review a set of plans that an architect submits, and he's going to check them to see that with Chapter 11, they've got compliance in this new built environment for the codes that they stand on today. There used to be a Chapter 34 in the building code up until the last cycle, the 2015 code, 2016 code in California, that covered the standards for existing buildings, and that gave you some guidance in regards to what would need to be brought up to current accessible standards when you did remodels or did tenant improvements or did those sorts of things. Chapter 34 is no longer in the building code. There's now a completely standalone code called the Existing Building Code, and it's an international code published by ICC, and it's adopted in California as the California Existing Building Code. And that's where you're going to get standards related to existing buildings that may be going through remodel or rehab, and how to provide guidance on bringing those to accessible levels with California standards and with the federal ADA. So the chapter you're going to be focused on this week is covering new construction standards of buildings, parking lots, accessible ways, those sorts of issues. You're going to see references in it to other codes, specifically accessibility standards that are in a different ICC document called 117. You're not going to be tested to that. We don't make you get a copy of that for this class. So it's the sort of thing that you just need to know you've got out there when you're looking at the standards in Chapter 11, that there are other documents that come into play. Similar to when we were in fire standards last week, there are a lot of NFPA references there. Here you have a lot of 117 references, which is a different body of regulation that drills down further into accessibility standards in buildings. Everyone, by the time you're viewing this, should have completed quiz number 2. Again, you got 2 tries. Hopefully you got the system down as far as using Canvas for taking quizzes. You got just the 1 week to do this one, so hopefully the trial run we did the first time around gave everybody a good prep. Going forward, the quizzes will allow 1 try only, so that now you should be developing some aptitude to finding questions in the code, or to finding the answers in the code. I also appreciate you guys when you find a test question that is worded weird or the system's not taking the answer correctly, shooting me those messages and letting me either work through the system or figure out a way to grade that question outside the system so that you get points for it in the end. I haven't heard too much this week, but as we go forward, part of the issue is that I write some of these questions, and sometimes I mess it up, sometimes the system's a little quirky. Either way, when we run into a glitch, we'll figure it out. One of the things to look for this week, and your discussion questions will also cover this, is that Chapter 11 has a number of exceptions. And like we've talked about before, when you're looking at these code standards, oftentimes you can't really get started on applying the standard until you've looked at all of the exemptions to that standard and making sure that you're not applying it to something it doesn't apply to. So pretty early on in Chapter 11, you'll find sections that cover exemptions to the accessibility standards, types of areas or types of buildings that don't require the Chapter 11 standards to be applied to them. So I'd focus on that. There's going to be a decent amount of test questions in the next quiz. about Chapter 11. Next week we'll move into Chapter 12. Chapter 12, frankly, is pretty light as far as quiz questions and ICC exam questions and that sort of stuff goes. So this week and next, if you spend a lot of time in 11, then I think you're pretty solid as far as testing both here in class and in the real world goes. Next week we'll move into Chapter 12 and talk about interior environments, tack a little bit back, we'll reference back a little bit to Chapter 8 when we talk about interior finishes, and do that next week. Something I want to point out that isn't in the IBC or isn't in any of your testing material here, but it's good for you to know when working in the field, is that in California we adopt 2 chapters of 11. So the California Building Code actually has a Chapter 11A and a Chapter 11B. Chapter 11A lays out specific standards and draws some standards from that 117 document I talked about earlier about how to construct housing accessibility and accessible multifamily dwelling units and certain institutions, things like that. 11B talks about accessibility to public buildings, commercial buildings, buildings that are open for use by the public, public housing, anything that's publicly funded, and a lot of that is federal. The standards are held in 11B or even with certain HUD standards. When you're building federal public housing, the local building departments don't often get involved in the plan review or inspection of those buildings. They're usually built under federal guidelines and inspected by federal inspectors. So it's important to note that if you're taking the class and we're working in just Chapter 11 in the code, when you're in the real world of California building inspection, you're going to hear a lot of reference to 11A and 11B. And those are 2 different, they break up the accessibility standards. And of course, in California, we have to be unique. So we adopt additional standards and sometimes some different standards into 11A and 11B than are in the standard Chapter 11 in the 117 document or even in federal ADA guidelines. And sometimes those can conflict and it gets a little messy. There is a certification called CASP, or a Certified Access Specialist certification, that the Department of the State Architect administers for folks that really study accessibility, not only from a building and code standpoint, but from a labor law standpoint, and really how to work with the disabled in the everyday world. And so most building departments have on staff, if not they're required by law to contract to a CASP, to perform an accessibility review of their standards, or of the plans that are coming in, to make sure they're to standard. And so you'll see in the everyday work world here in California a reference to this CASP certification that some people have. It's a test that has a failure rate higher than the bar exam. So it's easier to become a lawyer than it is to become a CASP certified plans examiner or inspector. So the people who have that really study hard to get it, and once they've got it, they're really the experts in this field. So when you get into, or if you are in the working world in building safety and inspection, when it comes to this accessibility stuff, find your agency's CASP certified person and make sure that you're pitching any questions to them that you have related to some of the real detail that you run in on accessibility here. I want to point out again that each week, in addition to discussion questions, I'm going to post a generic, non-graded discussion post for just questions for the week. I'm also going to sprinkle in some questions that will be graded over time to allow you to bring to the class's attention either vocabulary that you feel like you've learned that others should know about or that you have questions on, and other more minute code detail issues that as we get into the meat of this document now, we're into sections that have, it's not just administrative, it's really detailed billing element standards from here through week 14 or 15 when we get back into some code administration and enforcement stuff. So I want to make sure you guys have those questions available to be able to learn more of the vocabulary involved in what we're doing here and be able to ask questions about some of the current code standards so that we can drill down on those and you really have a good grasp of the material. I think that's about what I've got for you this week. Sorry I haven't been able to do a video every week. My schedule gets a little crazy, and frankly, making these and then remembering how to post them and getting all that done is not my forte, but I think it's helpful to at least some, if not a lot of you. So I try to do them periodically. I hope you have a good week. I will see you in Canvas. Remember to post questions, send me emails, give me a call if you've got anything, and I'll probably weigh in with an announcement post about how the quiz went here in a day or two when I get a chance to look at the results. All right, Bit 100, have a good week.